Good morning, everybody. It's good to see you again. So today, the topic that we are going to discuss, if not the most important, is probably one of the deepest concerns for not just this region, but the entire globe. We will be discussing a plenary which we have titled Enhancing Food Security and Rural Development in Asia and the Pacific. So that's a very short introduction to a very important topic that's going to be discussed soon on this panel with a list of really stellar list of people on this topic. But before I do that, as we do, to set the context for the discussion, the team has developed a short video. We'll showcase that video, and I'll be right back.
There's a strong connection between food security or food systems and climate change. It works in two directions. We're seeing sea level rise and causing salinity of our agricultural areas. So we're getting a lot of impacts, including increases in pests and diseases. These are all affecting our agricultural production and even our distribution of food. The other side of it is that agriculture and our larger food system is contributing to climate change. In fact, the food system as a whole contributes about 1/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions that are causing these rising temperatures. Ruminant or beef production and milk production and so on, and rice production is another source of greenhouse gases. But there's also land clearing, removal of forests, there's also transport, there's also food waste. So when we put all of that together, the food system is a big contributor to climate change. So if we're looking for solutions to climate change and solutions to kind of bring down our greenhouse gas emissions, we have to look at changes to the food system itself.
As we know, our food systems are struggling with climate and nutrition challenges, and the struggles hurt smallholder farmers the most. MDBs like ADB can continue to strengthen their investment in agricultural innovation. With these investments, IDB can help ensure a well-nourished, food-secure Asia and the Pacifics. For example, development of new flat-tolerant rice varieties has dramatically increased yield in flat-grown areas. This has improved food security for millions. CGR just signed a 5-year cooperation agreement with ADB to accelerate and scale innovation in the ag sector. ADB's partnership with entities like CGR and agribusinesses can really accelerate our evidence, innovation, and impact. We need to scale innovation, and to scale those innovations, we need sustained investment.
So there are three things I think the Asian Development Bank and all regional development banks can do to increase their impact on food security and good nutrition. First, disperse funds more quickly. All the reviews suggest that the disbursement is way too slow, and in a food security and malnutrition crisis situation, speed is everything. Second, leverage the private sector. The private sector is really, really important for getting nutritious and safe food at a low price to people who really are at risk of not getting that food. So whatever we can do to incentivize, de-risk, first loss investments for the private sector is really important. And the third thing to do is to focus development bank resources on the most vulnerable, partly because they are the most vulnerable, but partly also preventing them from being food insecure and malnourished is an investment in the resilience of the whole system, and a fantastic benefit-cost ratio of 16:1 of doing so. So these are the three things the development banks can do: disperse more quickly, leverage the private sector, and focus on the most vulnerable.
I think the MDBs can help with improving food systems, making sure that both supply and demand side interventions are working for the communities. They can also strengthen domestic transport infrastructures so that remote communities are able to bring in their food supplies to urban centers and be able to sell them. They can also help with research into resilience food crop. Women are, they're also highly impacted by all the changes that are coming with climate change, but they're also very resilient. Their voices need to be heard in all these decision making when it comes to climate change and all the impacts of climate change.
Right, so as many of you would agree, several very, very important points made there, and the panel will pick on all these points. But before we go that way, I'd like to introduce you to Garrett Kilroy. He's a very senior evaluation specialist at the Independent Evaluation Department. He's led several climate change-related evaluations. Let me call on to the stage Principal Evaluation Specialist at the Independent Evaluation Department of the Asian Development Bank, Garrett Kilroy.
Good morning, everyone, colleagues. Thank you for joining our plenary. My name is Garrett Kilroy. I was the team leader for this evaluation of ADB's plan for Operational Priority 5, Promoting Rural Development and Food Security, 2019 to 2024. Quite a long-winded title. Internally, the shorthand for this evaluation was OP5, but of course, OP5 means nothing to most people outside of ADB. And I was looking at the PDF for this report yesterday, and we used OP5 350 times in a 30-page report. So I've set myself a challenge to give this presentation without saying the words OP5. So wish me luck. But just like to acknowledge my ID colleagues who also worked on this report. Now, actually, ADB has been working on rural development and food security for many decades. And I think, I could show you the graphs, but probably a nice way to show it is for those of you who've been to ADB, if you go to our front gate, you'll see the old symbol for Asian Development Bank, where you can see the cog and the sheaf of rice. And that points to many decades of work in this area. And it's as relevant then as it is today. And if you look at the other charts, which is the UN Rome-based agency's latest report on food security, I've just showed two regions, Asia and Africa, because they cover 90% of the undernourished globally. Africa has the largest proportion of undernourished, and in absolute numbers, the largest is in Asia. So very much a relevant topic for ADB to be involved in. Now, in the first chart, you can see that ADB support for rural development and food security, it was designed to be delivered through three pillars, and the overall aim was to achieve prosperous rural economies for safe and nutritious food. And one of the big challenges at the start of this evaluation was to actually characterize what exactly does ADB do in this space. So we screened the 240 investments over the 6-year period, 2017 to 2022, to characterize the extent to which ADB was supporting those three pillars, rural development, agriculture value chain, and food security. And in the next couple of slides, I'll go through each of these. The first pillar concerns rural development, and it dominated the portfolio by number and volume, and mostly comprises non-agriculture support for rural infrastructure and services spread across many sectors. And in our alignment assessment, we found that the tagging of rural development was quite mechanical and with less direct connection to the objectives of the plan. And the lack of a clear definition of rural development and its role in food system likely contributed to this disconnect. The other two pillars were much more closely aligned. The sector breakdown shows that agriculture and natural resources is the anchor sector at 35%, but many other sectors contribute to ADB's work in this space. So the challenge was always going to be how ADB was going to effectively collaborate across sectors to deliver these thematic objectives, something that was not purposefully considered and implemented at the project or country level. The plan is also an area of engagement with a strong emphasis on co-benefits, particularly gender, environment, and climate resilience. And the portfolio is leading the institution in terms of adaptation finance. There were some gaps in the portfolio, particularly nutrition. So, for example, out of the 244 projects, only 3 had specific outcomes focusing on nutrition objectives. Also missing was mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions in agriculture. The role of social protection was also not well recognized, and disaster risk reduction was also not considered in detail, even though these are areas that support food security in many ways. The second pillar focuses on agriculture value chains, and there was a noticeable uptick with the number of investments almost doubling over the evaluation period. And this was largely driven by the agribusiness team of ADB's private sector department. Direct involvement in value chains on the sovereign side was less common. Now, there is no institutional approach to agriculture value chain in ADB, unlike what we saw in other development partners. So we mapped ADB's investments against a typology developed by researchers at Cornell University. And what we found was that most of ADB's efforts were targeting the larger, more specialized firms with links to global value chains and less on the traditional and transitional farms and firms. So an institutional approach like this is needed for ADB to map the entry points for sovereign and non-sovereign investments, and also to help foster cross-sectoral cooperation. Finally, the third pillar was on food security, which was not well defined in the plan, and when we looked at the portfolio for this pillar, it mostly focuses on agricultural production. Food security is a higher level objective sitting above these efforts, and in the absence of a clear definition, we adopted FAO's 4 dimensions of food security, and we mapped all 244 projects against this framework. And we found that about half of them supported at least one of the 4 dimensions. But you can see from the figure that ADB's greatest support is on availability, the supply side, mainly agricultural production, and the least was for utilization, which includes consumption and nutrition. But we did find support for nutrition, but as I said, it was often mistagged, and support was mainly through social protection and disaster risk reduction. So overall, our analysis highlighted that all 3 pillars support food security to varying degrees. We also found that partnerships are key for addressing weaker areas like nutrition and knowledge gaps, such as better tracking for food security. So our evaluation had 4 recommendations, which ADB management has accepted. And just to summarize, overall, the evaluation found that rural development and food security continues to be a key area of engagement for ADB. It builds on ADB's experience, it's leveraging important co-benefits on climate, gender, and environment, and it's supported by an improved performance in recent years in the agriculture sector. However, to deliver effective support and meet its ambition, ADB needs to reposition itself towards resilient and sustainable agri-food systems. This will involve clarifying its objectives, implementing one ADB approaches across sectors, articulating an institutional approach to agriculture value chain, increasing integration with the private sector, and strengthening the monitoring and reporting of results. Thank you for your attention.
Right, so we heard from ADB, now let's hear from IFAD. Let me invite onto the stage Vibhuti Mendiratta. Vibhuti has led several impact evaluations to understand what has been the impact of IFAD's interventions on smallholder farmers. She's not really an evaluator. She's from the research department of IFAD, and we're very happy to have you here. Vibhuti Mendiratta.
Thank you very much. Could we have the slides up, please? Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I'm going to talk a little bit about IFAD's experience with its impact assessments and in order to promote food as well as nutrition security. So let me just say that IFAD is not only a UN agency, it's also an international financial institution that funds rural development projects. The main target group of IFAD is smallholder farmers. And the main objective of IFAD is really to promote the livelihoods of the smallholder farmers together with their food security. So food security really features in our objective statement. Because as many of the speakers already highlighted, food security and rural development are intrinsically linked. I think Garrett gave this away a bit. According to the SOFI report of 2024, he mentioned that there are, he cited some numbers on food insecurity, but also the report highlights that about 757 million people are still undernourished, which means that they are not able to meet their daily caloric requirement. They also find that 2.8 billion people are not able to access healthy diets by using this cost of a healthy diet metric that they have been building upon over the last years. And it's really alarming. What's really alarming is also that the prevalence of undernourishment has been increasing since 2020. And that's something that, the context that we are operating under is very important to keep in mind. So let me, given this backdrop, let me quickly introduce the impact assessment approach at IFAD. There are two objectives why they're done. So the first is to be accountable and report results to the board. And the second is to learn, to understand what may be working, what's not working, and then, hopefully and potentially, fine-tune future project design based on these learnings. And the approach that we follow entails several steps. So every replenishment period of IFAD, which is a 3-year period, what we take is all the projects that are closing in that 3-year period, we randomly select 15% of the projects to undergo an impact assessment. These are stratified by region to ensure regional representativeness. Across these projects, then we go. These are ex post interventions because IFAD projects are long, they are scaled up. It's very hard to do RCT type of things. So we really go at the end of the projects, we do following quasi-experimental approaches. We then assess the impact of IFAD and co-financing investments on the livelihoods of smallholder farmers. And there are certain indicators we report on to the member states, which I'll talk about in a minute. We then, for each indicator, we then aggregate the impact and derive an average effect using meta-analysis approaches, and then project that onto the entire portfolio of projects that closed in the 3-year period. And this is, again, giving more details about what we do, but what I want to focus on here is that the two metrics on which indicators that we report on are food security and nutrition. Food security, we follow FAO's metric of food insecurity experience scale. And for nutrition, we use another metric that FAO has developed. It's called the Household Dietary Diversity Score to understand whether or not households have a diversified diet. So I'm going to show you the results for these two particular, what we find on these two indicators. For the period, which we call IFAD 11, replenishment period, or the period between 2019 and 2021, here on the map you can see the countries in which we had projects that were selected to undergo an impact assessment, and others that did close in this 3-year period, but that did not undergo an impact assessment. So using the approach that I just explained, and for this IFAD 11 replenishment period, what we did find was that food security increased for 58 million beneficiaries that benefited from IFAD and co-financing investment of USD 7.1 billion. What we also found, however, is that dietary diversity only improved for 0.6 million beneficiaries. And this is a very striking figure. It was very hard to present this to the board. We also found that consumption of unhealthy foods increased in some of the cases for some of the projects. So of course, we wanted to understand what might be causing, what might explain these figures. And the key lessons that, so we tried to do a drill down into this, and I see that my time is up. I'm going to take 1 minute. This is my last slide. What we did end up finding is we started looking at individual impact assessment reports to understand what might be the drivers. And there are two things that emerged. One is that food security is intrinsically linked to poverty. So if a project was designed to promote agriculture production, market access, and thereby income, we saw improvements in food security straight away. But for nutrition, of course, promoting poverty reduction is important, but what's also important is having an integrated and dedicated theory of change, which not only is anchored on the affordability and the availability of the healthy food, but also on consumer preferences. So how can we change also consumer preferences to make sure that they make these choices for healthy foods? And we have some examples coming up. So for example, in Zambia, we used model fathers and mothers. We trained them on what those healthy choices look like. They then went back into their own communities and emulated trained people in education, in fairs, fairs and other, community level events. They would go, and we did see in that particular project, there were great improvements in dietary diversity. So with these two messages in mind, IFAD has been trying to mainstream nutrition into its project, and it's become more active since 2019 and 2020, and we do hope to see these results in the future replenishment cycles. We do hope that the dietary diversity aspect will become more and more prominent in IFAD's interventions. Thank you.
All right, so now it's time for the panel discussion, and I'll call the name of the panelists. I request you to please come up and take the stage. We have with us today Zahir Raihan. He's the Additional Secretary, Ministry of Finance, Government of Bangladesh. Weiming Jiang, former Chairperson, SATS China. Abdelkarim Sma, Lead Regional Economist for the Asia and the Pacific Division, IFAD. Christopher David Nelson, Manager, Infrastructure and Sustainable Development Unit, IEG, that is the Independent Evaluation Group of the World Bank. Phuong Nguyen, Research Fellow in the Poverty, Health and Nutrition Division, International Food Policy Research Institute, that's IFPRI. Today's session will be moderated by Nathan Subramaniam. Nathan is Director, Sector and Projects Division of the Independent Evaluation Department at ADB. So over to you now, Nathan.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Nice to see so many of you here. We have a really good panel session planned for you on this very important topic. You heard a couple of nice tidbits that came out of Garrett's presentation and Vibhuti's presentation. They presented that there were millions of people that are malnourished, undernourished here in the region, in Asia Pacific. So it's clearly a very important problem that needs to be addressed. We also know this is the most dynamic part of the world in terms of growth, and there has been huge economic growth that's happened in the last couple of decades. And with that, there's been a lot of change in food habits. And so increasingly, there is demand for more complex foods, such as protein and so on. And that's going to put increasing pressure on this food security situation. And also, we know that this is also Asia Pacific here. This is one of the youngest parts of the world. And it's important for this region to realize the demographic dividend going forward in order to make sure this benefit translates into good economic gain going forward. In order for that to happen, we have to ensure children are fed properly, their nutrition needs are properly taken care of. And so even from that point of view, it's very important to address the food security challenge. And here at the panel, we have people to discuss this important topic from different viewpoints. We have Phuong that'll discuss this from a policy point of view. We have Abdelkarim, who will discuss it from an operations point of view. Chris will talk about the evaluation point of view and bring in the lessons and knowledge. Weiming will bring the very important private sector point of view. And then we have Zahir, who will bring in the most important client perspective. We got to get it right from the client's point of view. So hopefully we are able to have in this discussion a holistic view of food security, and hopefully at the end of it there are some good thoughts and ideas that you take away with to address this important problem. So with that background, let's get the panel started. And I want to start off by giving 2 minutes for each of the panelists to make their opening remarks. And they will talk about their key priorities, either their own individual priorities or their institution's priorities, and maybe also make 1 or 2 key reflections on the 2 presentations that you heard from Garrett and Vibhuti. So let's get started, and let's start with Phuong. Just 2 minutes, let's run through this, and we have 2 rounds of panel questions after that. So over to you.
Thank you. So I work for International Food Policy Research Institute, and my research interest is on maternal and child undernutrition, also with food security and food environment. I'm very passionate about the 2 presentations with the ADB vision and also about the issues that you mentioned about food security, food environment. I think the main important now is not only focus on making sure that people are well fed, that means they are full, they are not hungry, but also we need to ensure the quality, that means they need to eat healthy. And not only that, we also need to make sure that eating healthy, but also friendly environment. That means it should be sustainable, it don't harm the environment, it can protect environment, not much carbon emission, and like many other issues that we need to protect to make sure that our food system is sustainable for long term. So that's my main point.
Good, thank you. Chris?
Thanks very much. So for me, I want to touch on a couple of points that were brought up in the discussion, both the introductory video and the presentations. I think there's sort of 3 things that stand out from the experience that the Independent Evaluation Group at the World Bank has encountered over the last sort of 5 years in the agriculture space. The first one was one that was mentioned in one of the videos about the disbursement approach and what that means in terms of both from an evaluated perspective, but shifting our operational model. I think the key thing here is that what our evaluations have found is that we've got to get better at understanding what the different aspects of what it means to function as a system, how it applies to food security. Touching on 2 particular instruments that stand out in the World Bank where there's increasing flexibility to be able to do this. So one is on the contingent emergency response component, which is built in now to many projects. Now what that enables projects to do is to respond very quickly when things change. I can't tell you how often this occurs in the Pacific. It is one of the most important evolutionary aspects of projects in the Pacific, because what it enables us to do is very quickly move funds from one project and actually direct them to a disaster response issue. The second thing I want to drill down on is this notion of being more creative in regards to project design. One of the things that struck us in IEG, in both the agri-foods evaluation and also in a more recent one, which is a rural non-farm evaluation, is that very few projects are understanding how to amplify that idea of functioning as a system. So if we're thinking about lean season engagement and where there are ebbs and flows in regards to income and what people need to have as their sort of bucket of livelihoods, we're not very good at understanding that kind of cross-cutting nature. And I think what the World Bank has identified in this is the importance of dealing with this through the Global Challenge Program, which is a far more integrated way of thinking about the response. And the last thing I want to touch upon, or just point out, is this notion of better understanding the notions of intensity in food security. So again, going back to the presentation on impact evaluation. So we got a successful project, did a great job, but food security is getting worse. So we have to be thinking about what it means to amplify and looking at evaluation as a tool for watching the ebb and flow of what's happening across the planet, both from a sort of a political standpoint, conflict standpoint, but also in terms of climate change. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Chris. I think we should be aware of the time, and let's keep it short and crisp in terms of our responses. I want to insist on that, right? And I think Mitch is here giving you indications on whether the time is up. Let's hold to that. Abdelkarim, over to you.
Thank you very much. From the IFAD perspective, I would like just to highlight the need to take the livelihood lens, and the food is really a source of income for smallholders. I mean, there's 70% of the food consumed in low and middle income countries is produced by smallholders. So I think we need to keep in mind the focus on the producers and use a livelihood lens when we debate food security. The second issue is about the semantics of food security. There is increasingly a shift towards the use of food systems, and the use that concept requires system thinking. And this is quite complex because it really requires one to understand the leverage point and the feedback loops in a complex environment. And that's also the challenge that we face from the operational perspective, just to have clarity about the concept, but also to be really knowledgeable about what we can do and to which extent we can make a difference. So that's the challenge. Just a couple of quick comments on the presentation. I really concur with the fact that we need good food system tracking tools. I mean, there is a variety of tagging system, and the UN Food System Summit is working. One of the outcomes is the work on tagging public expenditure earmarked to food systems, and there is also similar efforts going on everywhere. So I think tagging food system investments is really important, and ADB and others needs also to align and work together on a common tagging system, so we know where we stand in terms of investments in food systems.
Thank you. Weiming?
Well, thank you. Very happy to join this section. Last 40 years, had the chance working with a multinational in China and learn a lot of things, especially related to the food topic. I like to addressing this issue in many directions, but I consider maybe it reminds us just a few minutes ago, we have one slide, and 8.5 billion people, and we have in the planet, but easily more than 6-point-something million people is from the APAC and Africa. So it's a great importance for us. If you look at global, there's a lot of crises that happen, the challenge for the human being, but there's two things essential for us: energy security, food security. Now today that we're addressing the food security, and there's many directions to discussing that topic, I'm very happy to contribute my experience on that topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Weiming. Zahir?
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here to say something. As you know, the Bangladesh is a very much populous, highly densely populated country. So feed to these people, it's our great challenge. So in our today's presentations inhibits that to cooperation and partnership is leveraging into our agriculture sector. It's very key to boost our agriculture product and save our food security. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Zahir. So let's get started with the panel rounds. We are hoping to have 2 panel rounds. Each of the rounds will run for about 20 minutes each. Each panelist will have about 4 minutes to respond. The first round, let's focus on the context and the challenges. Let's lay it out. And as I said, the panelists will lay it out from their own different perspectives. So let me first start with Phuong. Phuong, you've been a practicing doctor. You bring a unique perspective here. You've seen the effects of bad nutrition with regard to children firsthand, right? And maternal and child health is a big passion of yours. And in your current capacity, you're also working on policy implementation and coming up with nice policy actions, right? And we all know understanding knowledge gaps is absolutely critical to coming up with good policy. What are the challenges that you see in terms and constraints that you see in the context here that we are operating in to come up with effective policy?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I totally agree that to addressing malnutrition and food insecurity, understanding the gap is really a big critical thing. So globally, we already know that in many low and middle income countries, the undernutrition have a tendency to reduce in a lot of countries. For example, we can see that the prevalence of children underweight or stunting, or the prevalence of mother underweight or anemia reduce in a lot of countries. But at the same time, we also see emerging burden of overweight obesity, not only in the rich country, but also in many, many different poor countries, that the prevalence increase statistically. And then in parallel with that is a diet-related non-communication disease. Just example like high blood pressure or like diabetes. So that's a lot of issue. And still, we see the micronutrient deficiency still exists in many countries, like the zinc deficiency, vitamin A deficiency, folate deficiency. So it's not only double, but it kind of triple burden of malnutrition in many countries. So both undernutrition, overnutrition, and micronutrient deficiency. Or we can see something called like hidden hunger. So it raises a big challenge for nutrition community that in terms of improving nutrition and food security, we need to think like overall approach that like have a dual or triple action to address several issues. The second one I want to mention is the system-based approach is very important for us to think of. So we need to think of health system, working with the food system, working with the agriculture system. That one all interlinked. Just example, talk only the food system. We need to think about like the real long pathway from food production, food processing, food distribution, the retailer, the exchange, the supply side, and then to the plate of the people. Or we can say that from farm to fork. So the whole pathway through that is still challenging. There's a lot of myths during the pathway that we need to understand. So in terms of the nutrition, there's few points that we still have a big gap. Number one is the lack of data or different angle. The lack of data on diet. We normally know that qualitatively like what food people eat or what food group people eat. But we don't have much data on very in-depth on the energy, on the protein, on the lipid, on the micronutrient, on different vitamin A and micronutrient. And that data normally takes time, it's costly, it needs high capacity to collect that data and to analyze that. So the building the capacity of collecting the good data that can give the evidence base for policy is very critical. Another data point we need to think is the impact of different strategy or intervention, both sensitive and nutrition specific, how it impacts and what is the cost of that impact. If we invest in some strategy or intervention, how much it returns. That one is a strong message we can bring to the policy, but we don't have much data on that. So that one is something we need to invest on. Final one is some determinant. The determinant both in the consumer side and on the supply side at different level. Just example, at the individual level is a preference, is a behavior factor in different cultures that can affect people. Maybe the social norm around the community, it can affect, we need to understand that. And then at the policy level is how the policy can work together. Just example, the trade policy or the agriculture policy. Do they talk to each other? Do they talk with public health? Because the trade one, they want to import different things like the sugar sweetened beverage or different snack one because it can bring a lot of benefit or the profit. But on the other hand, it can harm the health of people. So how can they talk to each other is another issue we need to maintain. So anyway, that there's a lot of gap in terms of both data and bring evidence from data to policy action. Thank you.
No, thank you for one. Wonderful points there. And I think we can come back to this in the second round as well, because data is an underlying theme that runs across as a major challenge in this space. Chris, over to you, right? You just heard Garrett present. We recently concluded an evaluation on this topic earlier this year. And one of the biggest challenges that we faced in that evaluation was, how is this topic defined? Food security itself is a thematic priority, and it's very loosely defined in many of the institutions as to what goes in, what goes out is not clearly understood, and as a result, many institutions are finding it difficult to tag their operations even to food security. There are a lot of areas of omission and inclusion. So that was a big challenge that we faced. You know, World Bank sends out billions of dollars for this cost, and what are the challenges that you guys face in terms of assessing food security operations?
Thanks. So I think what really struck me in Garrett's presentation is the fact that many of the same issues that you confronted in your evaluation apply to the situation in the World Bank. I think a couple of things that stood out in particular, one of which was this notion of how we deal with nutrition and the incorporation of nutrition in terms of both food security, but also the relationship with agriculture. And I think that's always been a kind of a difficult one, because you've got the nutrition sector being kind of living within the human development sphere, and the agriculture has a technocratic focus in the sustainable development sphere. So I think better understanding those crossovers is certainly one area where evaluation has to get better. I think the second thing that struck me in regards to the ADB evaluation is this notion of supply chains, transitional and traditional. There is a huge challenge for the World Bank, particularly on the private sector side, in being able to adapt and still provide the necessary support for supply chains that work at a more micro level. And I think there's really good examples of this historically in some of our field evaluations that we've done in both Asia and the Pacific. Philippines has very good examples of a slightly different approach to field level engagement, individual farmers that are able to actually penetrate and contribute to global supply chains, but in a multifaceted way. We've never been particularly good at better understanding that, and so the whole approach of the International Finance Corporation has been very much about engaging with the Dole bananas and trusting that that investment will lead to a response in regards to producers in Mindanao. And what I think we haven't picked up is how significant that is in regards to changing the way that those farmers actually function, work, and how the livelihoods affect their households. So I think that's the second thing. The last thing I want to talk about is this long-term versus short-term horizons. So I think one of the big challenges in the rapid scale-up of the allocations for food security is a huge proportion of the World Bank portfolio has been outsourced. It's been outsourced to many UN agencies, and it's an emergency response function, and I think that's a fundamental aspect. But I talked a little bit yesterday in one of the sessions about what we found in doing this recent synthesis is that when we looked at many of the projects in the food security space, what we actually found is that those that were long-term and had multiple dimensions that included longer-term responses and support changed the approach that the project took to distribution and to the food security response. And those projects tends to be more successful. And this comes back to the point I made earlier about that notion of intensity. I don't think we understand enough about the variation in intensity within particular countries. I think better understanding that is fundamental to where we go next. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Chris. Really some very good points there, right? And I think you brought up that point in terms of lack of understanding at the community stage, at the end user stage. And that's where it's a nice flow into Abdelkarim, right? IFAD focuses quite a bit at the community level, right? And your experience has been not only on the operational side, because you've been overseeing operations in transition economies of the former Soviet Union and also a lot of the Asia-Pacific economies with regard to agriculture and food security operations, but you were also coordinating international operations for the USDA in North Africa, right? So what are the challenges that you see? How do you compare and contrast the challenges that you see in these other regions, and also maybe touch on what Chris was talking about, right? The challenges that are unique in dealing at the community level, right? And how are they comparing and contrasting in the different regions? Over to you, Abdul.
Thank you very much. I would like to answer your question, to address your question using an evaluation lens. And the sense is that, and there is a point that I really touched upon in my introductory remarks, is about when dealing and designing a food security intervention, you have also to layer many other aspects. You have to look into the carbon neutrality agenda, the inclusion agenda, the trade policy agenda. And so this complexity element makes it really difficult to come up with impactful investment which are really simple to implement or can be really implemented within the limited capacity and the broadband delivery that we have in many countries. So that's the first point that I think it's common in all regions. The fact that the food security, the agriculture and development arena is really becoming sophisticated in the sense is that you have to look into the energy transition, you have to look into the elements about trade, the geopolitics and the fragility, etc., are really elements that you need to factor in when you design operations. And that's a challenge from the practice perspective, but also from the evaluation perspective. There is another point I would like just to highlight is the scale of interventions. We tend to overlook that. If I look at IFAD, we commit every year about $1 billion into food security, agriculture, development, etc. I've looked into the OP5 evaluation that Garrett has presented. We're talking about $5 billion being committed per year, because there's $15 million over the period of 2019, 2022. So we're talking about $5 billion. The World Bank, maybe we're talking about a global agriculture portfolio of 25 billion. So try to contrast these figures with the billions and trillions of dollars that all the empirical papers are really talking about. I mean, I've recently saw a paper that from the International Food Security Commission, which recounts that in order to invest into inclusive and transformative food system, you require 500 billion a year in incremental investments, mostly coming from domestic and private sector. 500 billion a year of incremental investment. And so there is really a contrast here. And so here the idea is about how we can make those relatively small multilateral development resources transformational, in the sense how they can really catalyze other investment. And that's the challenge, I believe, in putting in place this kind of interventions. In IFAD, we try to assess scalability at the entry point, but I think that's an element which tends to be overlooked when we evaluate projects. And there is really different understanding about scalability pathways and what really constitutes the right scale. And I think that's another challenge, and this is also common in many regions. The third point I would like just to highlight is when designing projects, you need also to be mindful about client preferences and limitations. For instance, we have countries in this region which have ODA policies which require us only to invest in infrastructure. And when you come with a project which is impactful, you need really to combine hard assets, infrastructure, with soft assets, with capacity building, with putting in place institutions, et cetera, et cetera. And sometimes you are faced with these limitations where the financial product that you provide or the limitations in terms of what the country, and especially for IFAD, we are exclusively working under sovereign lending, is really ready to accept. So that's also another challenge. And then the fourth point, and I see my time is up, is about implementation readiness. So most of the time, these investments, they are not implemented by the IFIs and the MDBs. They are implemented by governments. And by governments, I mean PMUs and the wide array of institutions, domestic institutions. And here, capacity building is really important. And I think we need to double down on capacity building providing implementation support to ensure we have impactful operations. Over.
Yeah, thank you, Abdelkarim. Again, a lot of really good points there. I think something to come back to, right, in later discussions. Weiming, over to you. I think the private sector perspective is absolutely critical here in this space, because agriculture, at the end of the day, is a private sector enterprise, right? And for most developmental initiatives, much of the money, if the problem has to be solved, has to come from the private sector. So to come up with transformative solutions, innovative solutions from the private sector is absolutely critical. You have more than 4 decades of experience, fascinating experience actually, applying biotechnology and biosciences to solve the nutrition and well-being problems for humans and for animals, and a lot of health-related projects as well. And you've also worked on the supply chain and consolidation, building economies of scale with the food systems on the entire pipeline. Tell us what challenges have you faced? And you've had tons of experience here in China, and there is a lot for the rest of the region to learn from China on its best practices. What challenges have you faced in terms of private sector engagement with addressing problems in food security in the region?
Thank you, Nathan. All the subject we can talk about 1 hour, right? But I think when I joined the meeting, I listened to the slides, and I feel there's a few things probably I can contributing for the discussion. Number one, that if you're looking food security, now talk about China, all over you is in China, but it's wonderful you come back after COVID. It is a country which is 1.3 billion people, and you probably know very well they have a limited cultivated land compared with the United States or other big nations, and probably India. So China has been, from day one, the food security is #1 strategic focusing area. So I can park that topic, because this topic is well addressed by many government people, and private sector, of course, we can contributing, especially on certain technology, which I love to discuss. But let me park that one. But I feel equally important is somebody addressing the unhealthy food, eating well. Not only eating good, but eating well. Because that is a very, very big topic now in China, which my last 40 years operating here. And actually expanding to many nations, I see potentially a big issue. If you think about that, food safety is a huge issue with the proper nutrition. And there's a lot of a challenge for the global. You talk about obesity, you talk about heating hunger, and you talk about many things that you face the developing country very quickly. You talk about aging population in the APAC. You talk about infant healthy development, infant formula, that we all need addressing nicely in such huge population nation. So those area, I think, is a key area where the private sector not only can contributing, but also can take a responsibility. And because if we take one example, when China become a kind of, just opened up 40 years ago, basically food safety, security is #1. I mean, very little thing that you want to make sure everybody can buy the food. But today, probably the basic food, the starch-based food, if it is sufficient. By the way, it's not very sufficient, but it's sufficient. But if you're looking the last 40 years, there's many other things, the lipids and protein industry developing very quickly. And among the animal protein that are developing in China, huge, and I can give a lot of figures, but let me, saving the time. But addressing also climate change issue, addressing so many issues for the soil conditions and a lot of things. Now, private sector should addressing that. Now, also think about the large chemical industry that happen in China, and it's probably #1 chemical ingredient producers in China. I'm not saying that, I mean, I'm studying chemical. I'm not saying the chemical is bad. Actually, chemical is good, contributing to our life in a healthy way. However, but if you talk about food additives, if you talk about ingredients in the food, the processing food, which we all dressing, that I would rather see less chemical and much more biochemical and natural ingredients. And this is also responsibility that we did for last 30, 40 years. There's a lot of area we can talk about that take the topic. I would like to ask everybody to pay attention, not only the food security, but also food safety and healthy food for our population, healthy growth. So let me contribute so far. Yeah.
Excellent. I think some wonderful points there for us to again revisit. One is the carbon intensity of this food system, and I think 1/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions are emitted by the agricultural food systems, and there is an important priority that needs to be placed on addressing that angle. But you also raised some very important points on food safety and standardization of the food systems. That's also absolutely critical, and I think that has a nexus with policy as well that Phuong talked about. Now, Zahir, over to you finally. You know, as I said earlier, you are the main piece of the puzzle here. You are the client, and so you see on the ground the complexity of implementing this, and you have, you know, from the government's perspective, you have a number of competing priorities that you need to work on. What are the challenges that you see on a day-to-day basis in addressing food security challenges in your country?
Thank you, Abdelkarim. Before going to show our challenges related to food security, I want to show some figures that you know, Bangladesh is not a big country with only 148 square kilometer, living around 1,200 per square kilometer people. So it's a highly one of the most densely populated country. That's why food security is important for us. For us. Still, we have severe food insecurity in 0.83% people. That stands 1.4 million people. And moderate insecurity, it is almost 22%. That stands 3.4 million people. So how severe the contest is aligned with Bangladesh, you know. That first challenges I want to show here, that is UNDP identified Bangladesh is #1 tropical cyclone prone and 6th flood prone country in the world. So natural calamities like floods, cyclones, tidal bores, that is every year occurring in every year, that hampers our agricultural product also. So climate change here, due to climate change and others elements are there. So climate change, you know, there are 3 actors are acting in our economy or our agriculture sector. That is global, you know, global warming threatens our agriculture product, and salinity and natural flow of river waters. So it's hinders always. Then regional factor is there. It's very much important. You know, we have small and big rivers, more than 1,000 rivers we have. And most of the big rivers that originated outside of Bangladesh, mostly in India or somewhat Nepal. So about 90% water discharge from outside of Bangladesh. So when flood season, when rainfall, heavy rainfall is there outside of Bangladesh, inside of Bangladesh, so lot of water coming through that flows from Bangladesh to the Bay of Bengal. So flood is obvious, and you know, this year you have seen on social media or TV, we have experienced a severe flooding, and it is important that in new areas are becoming under water. That name, one is Feni district. I think in my life I never seen they experience any flood. So it's I can say this flood it is not the contribution of in our country, but it's somewhat related to the outside of country. So every big rivers when come from rivers water come from the outside of Bangladesh. Others country they make embankment with sluice gates when rainfall heavy excessive rainfall then cannot afford all this water, so they open up the sluice gates. So what's the consequence? You know, our livestock, lives, all damaged. And in this recent flood in August, affected at least 6 million people, and already 50 people are dead. So, but still we have waiting for another flood for another region or wherever. So this is a big regional problem, and then national problem is there. So lot of embankments in the national level and infrastructure, and somewhat lack of dredging. So sediments are deposited in the river banks. So it's a problem. It's another problem case for agriculture. Then I want to mention some other factors that is not issue of natural disaster, the somewhat man-made, you can say. That is our agricultural land, arable land is gradually diminishing. One statistics I have I can say, every year 1% agricultural land is diminishing, but our rice production growth rate is 1%, but our population growth rate is 1.3%. So excess population, we have to feed them. This is another challenge. And another big challenge is, I think it is like Bangladesh and other countries also, that is growing income inequality. To show the income inequality, it is a standard way to show the Gini coefficient. In 1988, we have the our G was 3.37, and it raised in 2010 0.45. In 2002, it is 0.499. Maybe it crossed the 0.5. So highly income inequality is there. So therefore, individual or household access to the food is becoming difficult, you know. So then inflation. Since pandemic, we are experiencing more than 10% inflation rate, and food inflation is almost 14-15%. So individual poor, insecure people, food insecure people becoming in miserable condition gradually. Then unemployment also is a challenge. That is in our country, it is 3.51, almost 0.25 million people. So that's our almost the challenges we are facing are related to food security. Thank you very much.
No, excellent, Zahir. I think it's a fantastic point. I think my mic went off here. Both you and Weiming brought this important point in terms of, you know, the issue with arable land in the country, right, and the density of population that is living off that arable land, and not all countries are blessed with the same share of arable land. The other issue that you brought up, which is also really important, is the external factors that come into play, and that brings into question the issue of resilience, right? Because it's not only you that what is under your control that you can take care of, but you also need to factor in all these externalities. And so you got to build enough resilience in the system. So I think this is something that needs to be factored in as well we'll talk about in the second round, right? So we're running a little bit behind time, so I request you guys in the second round to be a little bit more crisp, right, in your delivery, so that we have a little bit of time for the audience as well to come in with their Q&A questions. Now, now that the first round is done, hopefully all of you understood a little bit better now the context and challenges that are facing this particular sector, food priority area, food security. Now, in the second round, we want to try and discuss from, again, all these different perspectives, what are some of the possible solutions to address these challenges, right? So again, let's go in the same order here. Let me start with you, Phuong. You mentioned data and evidence, and you're using that to come up with appropriate policy implementation, right? And you're also working on this important Poshan initiative to harmonize nutrition standards, right? And so tell us, based on the data research that you have done, and based on its effects on policy, what are some of the low-hanging fruit that is there in terms of policy actions that the rest of Asia Pacific can immediately benefit from and implement and have good impact in terms of addressing the food security challenge? Over to you.
Okay, thank you. So having worked with the Nutrition Initiative in India for more than 10 years, we have tried to bring all the evidence base to policy. So I just want to share some of experience that may have to apply to few other countries and that may be successful. So number one is we try to provide or to create the linkage between the evidence and policy. How can we do that? So first, for any evaluation, any implementation of program, we try to engage with different stakeholders at the national level and the state level as soon as possible. Just example, if we want to do one research, we would like to invite the government policy, the government body, also the civil organization, the academic institution, and some other local partner there. So we have a small workshop. We talk about here's the research question, here's the design. Do the research question really answer the demand that the country needs? And if not, how can we modify that? How we can work around that? So that is a very early stage. We want to involve everyone. And then in the next stage, when we have a data collection and in the time we analyze the data and then doing the report or the brief, we also bring the government people and all kind of local partner to be the co-product. So that means everyone have the voice in that. Everyone have feeling that they own that data set, they own that, that document, they own that product. And then later on, it can easy to make the linkage between that to government. And then bring that to the government policy framework and make it more actionable. So that is our success, and then that is what we want to share. The second one is we work to increase or enhance the capacity of evidence utilization. Because a lot of times, the research normally write a very fancy report or paper with all the coefficient or odds ratio or all kind of thing. But when we bring that to policy, it needs to have a different language. It needs to have a kind of more easily understandable, more visualization, and how the people, even at the district level, the commune level, and the provincial level, they can understand that data. That is another question. So we make the data talk, that make it more visually attractive. And then we have several workshops or capacity for them to try to use the data, to understand the data. We make several dashboards or briefs to help the people understand that. And when they understand, they are excited about the data. They see how it can apply for the reason, and they eager to learn that and to use that to make the policy one. So that's the second point. The third point we would like to say is a lot of partners normally work in the same area or different partners, but more or less similar issue. So we try to bring all the partners work together. Just example, World Bank, IDB, International Food Policy, UNICEF, we all work to improve the undernutrition or enhance the nutrition of maternal and child health. But we want to bring everyone together to bring one voice to the government. Otherwise, each people give different messages, so it's very confusing at the higher level. And finally, the subnational or the local context is very important because each area have very unique characteristic, unique capacity. So we need to tailor to make it more realistic, more suitable for each region. So basically 4 main points: linkage between evidence and policy. The second is enhance the data utilization. The third one is bring in one voice with different partners. And finally is a local contact and subnational strategy. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Phuong. And I think there's a lot of really good points there. I want to request the rest of you to limit it to 3 minutes each because I think we are running a little bit short on time. So if you can keep it a little bit short and crisp. Chris, next to you, you heard from, from our side, the evidence that came out of our food security evaluation. It was a lot more oriented towards the supply side. And so in some of the smaller, especially in the FCAS and SIDS countries, where you had to bring in the demand perspective, things were lost, right? And the direction of the program was not as precise as it could have been, right? There was also an important evidence that came through in terms of lack of focus. Only a very small share of the operation was focused on nutrition, right? So what are some of the evidence and lessons that are coming out of the World Bank evaluation to improve the resilience of the entire system? So if you can highlight some of the top big messages that the rest of the audience here can quickly learn from. There's an opportunity, as Phuong talked about, is to outreach it, make sure the evidence that we have translates into action.
Okay, thanks. So I think the World Bank's response to the 2 evaluations, but more importantly, as part of the evolution roadmap that has been rolled out under the new president, is very focused on shifting our thinking in regards to these global challenges. And I think there's 3 dimensions to that are worth mentioning. The first one is on the financing and partnerships. I think what's important here is that there is recognition that we have to be more creative in regards to identifying where there are the financing gaps and what kind of role both the IFC, the International Finance Corporation, and the finance unit within the World Bank can play in formulating access to finance for farmers that can begin to engage in the much more of a private sector model. I think on the partnership side, what we're encouraging here is 2 things, one of which is the internal partnerships. There has been a sense in which many of the global practices have been silos that roll out their own individual programs. And I think the whole premise of the Global Challenge Program approach is to say that actually doesn't make sense. We have to shift our thinking in regards to that. And I think this is very evident in South Asia, where Martin Razor, the Vice President, has big ambitions with regards to a nutrition program that is going to be rolled out in the next couple of years that incorporates multiple dimensions, including many in the agriculture space, many on childhood stunting, many in regards to understanding how the food system actually functions. The second is the knowledge and learning, and I know that there was an additional question on how the World Bank and multilaterals can partner with some of the research organizations. I don't think we do a good job on that, and I think both our evaluations found that the partnerships that happen tend to be much more internal than external. And I don't think we draw enough on the expertise that is out there. And I think particularly at the micro level, in better understanding the different facets of engaging with farmers at the local level is really important. Right? And that also relates to the contextual issues. What you're dealing with in the Pacific is entirely different from what you're dealing with in South Asia. And the last one is the aligning and streamlining processes. I think we're really trying to better understand how under a much more amplified and a larger approach to dealing with a multi-sectoral issue, you actually need to think about the instruments that we're using differently. And that means kind of saying, okay, so what is it that we want from development policy loans that can lend themselves to engaging in the agriculture sector? Our development policy loans very rarely have prior actions that align to agriculture. And I think that's a disappointing aspect of avoiding in certain sectors that engagement on what do you want to see as policy reform that might actually make a difference. So I think they're the 3 kind of areas that most stand out. From an evaluation perspective, I think we again need to focus a little bit more on better engaging with those contextual differences. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. And now next to Abdelkarim, you know, from IFAD's point of view, you guys are involved in a lot of capacity knowledge building services, right, to improve the resilience of these food systems. You're also involved in a lot of this, you know, strengthening of the supply chains and agriculture value chains, right? And so tell us, how can we make, from what you know from IFAD's experience, how can some of these challenges be addressed on the food security space to make them more inclusive and sustainable?
Absolutely, and thank you very much. I want to just highlight 3 elements in my view, which would probably make a dent into the food insecurity, and Garrett and Vibhuti has really shared alarming trends where we see global food insecurity on the rise. I would like just to emphasize the fact that food security is a global good in itself. Food insecurity is a global bad. And as IFIs, we always tend to treat it country by country, because this is why we are built. We are built through this engagement country by country. I think we need to transcend that and look into the transboundary elements of the food security. And that's really important. And I think the evaluation work should also work in that direction and help us capture the transboundary elements and how we can capture food security through a regional lens and global perspective. I think that's the way to go, given the nature of the food exchanges and the transboundary threats like climate change, animal health, et cetera, et cetera. And the region has really experienced this kind of transboundary threats. And the second point is about the inclusiveness. I think there's a lot of talk about scaling up investment, right? It needs to be impact investment. It needs to be investment done for the producers. It needs to be an investment which takes into consideration the gender element, the nutrition element. It's all these elements which makes the likelihood of success higher. I mean, just all these enablers and inclusiveness, I see it. It's an inequality issue, it's an ethical issue, but it's also as an enabler issue. And really, we get good return on investments through inclusiveness. And we in IFAD, we have really worked a lot on our targeting policy, and I think we are among the few institutions which have a dedicated targeting policy, which really requires us to go to the poorest elements, to the poorest segments of the populations, as opposed to assuming that, you know, income growth and rising tides will lift all boats. We have this really element of proactive pursuit of targeting, which is really important for food systems. And then the third element is the knowledge element that you mentioned. And I think we should also think about ourselves as essentially providers of knowledge. As I said, our finance is there to catalyze, to have a demonstration effect, but it's not going to really change the situation. I think we need to position it in a way so to crowd in finance from other sources, but knowledge is really capital. And this is the area where we can really make a difference. So these are the 3 elements I think are really the way forward and would help us to address this challenging situation. I see my time is up. I'm done.
Thank you, Abdelkarim. I think Weiming and Zahir, I think we have to do this very quickly. I want to be very pointed in my question to both of you. To you, Weiming, what can the international financial organizations, the MDB community, do to better engage private sector, to catalyze investment from private sector in this space? What can be done? Ultimately, it's the private sector that has to solve this puzzle. But what can the MDBs do better to bring them in?
Well, certainly I'm not a financial guy, so it's difficult to say how we cooperate. But basically, I think there's basically 2 areas when we're addressing today's forum, in my opinion, that we can collaborate together, and together with government, institution, and financial sector. Certainly, private sector could take lead and driving. There's one called the agriculture business, right? Just addressing on the slides. And this context, there's a lot of area we can do. You can talk about seed industry. You can talk about fertilizer industry. You can talk about pesticide industry, the new dimension. Because when you're addressing that, you should not forget ecosystem, that we all worry about the water pollution, we worry about the deterioration of the soil condition, and those areas that we also need technology repair the water and also repair the soil. There's tons of projects that we could do and we should do. Now, the other industry I would like to pay attention is the food industry. The food, in the beginning, is a very simple food, but now become much more sophisticated, where the living conditions are increasing, and also the population change. Their condition for the food is also changing. Infant need a different food, aging population, and the population, by far the majority, need different food. The balanced nutrition is so important, otherwise causing huge issue. I talk about the obesity and the malnutrition, and you talk about also heating hunger. You gave all the costs. So those industries that we also should addressing by addressing the new technology rather than the old technology, adding unhealthy food. So these two areas I consider so much room that we should do private sector together with the banking and government.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for keeping it short and crisp. A question to you as well, Zahir. From the government perspective, right? What can be done? The coherence from the government side is pretty complicated because you have various agencies involved. Similarly, in the big institutions, all these MDBs have various sectors and various parts of the bank that's involved in these operations. Coherence is a problem on both sides. What can be done, you think? What can the MDBs and the other IFIs do better to engage with you? So just a couple of headline points, crisp ones, so we can go to the audience as well.
Thank you. With all challenges, but we have to maintain our economic growth with sustainable way. That's why we have to do the research work for crop diversity with SYV, and the hardy species. It's doing our Bangladesh Rice Research Institute is continuously, they invented the new varieties with the collaboration of IFPRI. And then mechanization is important in our agriculture because fresh parts sometimes damage our agriculture product. So mechanization is important, and synchronizing with the digital agriculture, like using the remote sensing and data analysis. So our agriculture farmers can be benefited. And then cooperation, it is important cooperation between other countries who are share the cross-border rivers. It's important, very much important, we can do. Then eradicate the inequalities. Good governance must be ensured. It is the government perspective. And I want to know if government is enacted to prevent the agricultural land, enacted an act in 2015, but enforcement is very slow. It's important. So, and Bangladesh government already established a Bangladesh Food Safety Authority, who are responsible to ensure the safe food as well as the storage, production, and distribution channels through the field level monitoring. So that's why Bangladesh still, with huge population, Bangladesh still the third position in rice production, vegetable in third position, and potato fourth position, and fish is fourth position in the world. So a lot of mechanisms are trying to introduce in our agriculture so that our food security can be ensured. So that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for making it crisp. Now let's open it up for Q&A. I think we have time for one or two questions. Let's open it up. I think there are mics around that will be brought over to you. Just stand up, introduce yourself very quickly, and ask the question. Who wants to go first? Anyone?
Everybody understood. Very well convinced, eh?
All right. So maybe then there's no questions from the audience. Maybe I can ask, because I rushed the last two panelists, maybe I go back to them to engage them on a question to follow up. Let me come back to you, Weiming, since we have time for one question, right, which is, I want to also take a few minutes to close this, but to you, right, and I think, what happened to the mic? I think the mic went away. So, Weiming, I want to come to you, which is, in your 4-decade career, I'm sure, at the end of the day, this is about improving productivity, right, and making sure that, what has worked and what is time tested, for which there is evidence and data, something that's radically transformed agriculture and food security in some other part of the world, is brought to bear in a new place and in a new region, so that a new community can benefit from the same technology. With that, what do you, from your 4-decade experience, are there big transformative innovative solutions, be it in terms of seeds or fertilizers or any of these other areas in this food system chain, that you think is something that can be widely adopted, for example, in South Asia or in other big population centers, and clearly benefit the productivity?
Well, I think when we talk about the geopolitical that relate to this issue, it's a very difficult topic. But I think let me put a very simple term that you're all reading all the newspaper and so on. But I think the common issue that human being has is we have this 8.5 billion people, that we are limited land. I mean, if we only dressing, whatever food and medical, all the expenditure for only 140 million people versus 8.5 million people, then it's a disaster. So we have to do very much open communicating on those technology useful. I think, first of all, trading. And I really hope, despite the challenge between the United States and China, you probably know they're still trading a large amount of food, which is important. I think despite all the challenges we have, we should continue open the communication and trading. That's one thing. Technology should not be considered as a privacy, and should be considered as everywhere it could be used. Because today, no matter for all the challenges we have, all the bio method or maybe other method for seed, for fertilizer, for soil, water, and for nutrition, every segment you're dealing, you cannot limit it, say this is only for my country. It is a country, it is a technology using for everybody. So I consider the most important is open, communicating, and inclusiveness. And that's probably the most important the mindset that we need to do. And I really like this panel discussion because we had addressing the majority Asia and Africa interests, which is by far the most important for human being.
Yeah. Thank you, Weiming. Let me take, I think we have a couple of minutes now, right, let me take these couple of minutes to close this session. I think hopefully, you all agree with me. We've had a wonderful discussion. Hopefully you go away from this panel with a much better understanding of the context and the challenges that are facing food security operations. You heard it from different practitioners from different perspectives. And we also heard a few tidbits in terms of how to address these challenges. Certain things really stood out. One is the use of technology and innovation and the engagement of private sector as a solution mechanism for this. Another one is the need for having proper data and evidence to come up with a proper enabling environment and proper policies, and the enforcement mechanisms to follow through on that to make sure things are mainstreamed and there is proper corporate governance that comes out at the end of the day for all of this. And I think there was a good point that Phuong made, which is making sure that there is no gap between evidence and implementation, because a lot of times these two worlds don't talk to each other, and we need to make sure these are connected, and that for which there is a black and white evidence, those get transformed into actionable implementation steps. There was also good points that were raised on the importance of building resilience. So it's not only taking care of your own stuff, but also addressing some of the external factors and bringing and strengthening resilience in the system. And finally, not to forget inclusive aspects, to make sure that all of the society benefits from food security, and the needs are different for different parts of the society, and those need to be holistically considered. So I think, I only did a sparse capture of all the rich discussion that happened, but hopefully this is all recorded, will be placed on social media, and there'll be an opportunity for all of you to go back and listen to it all over again and capture things that you think are more appropriate for you, for your own personal situation. With that, let me thank the panelists. Wonderful. Thank you so much. I learned a lot. It was a very enjoyable discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll go.